Welcome to the Middle Ground. I'm your host, Michael Carnuccio, joined, of course, by my co-host, Trent England, who you can hear weekdays on 1640 AM The Eagle. Trent, it's been another exciting week of session, although this was spring break, maybe a little bit slower, but let's talk about some of the highlights.
Well, that's right. The legislature took the last couple days off of the week, so Thursday and Friday they had out, but started off with a bang. Big hearing on Monday. I know we're going to talk a lot about this House Bill 1749 that had already passed the House, passed in a Senate committee there, and still a lot of talk about the budget, things narrowing down, texting in cars, a lot of issues up for grabs at the legislative session.
Let's talk a little bit about that texting in cars and in vehicles, because this has come up the last few years, and the issue will get a lot of attention outside of the Capitol. We've all seen the billboards. We've all talked with folks. We hear the radio commercials that are on now. But then in the legislative process, different discussions come up. Where is that discussion right now?
Well, there are some very different takes on how to go after a problem, and I think most people recognize it's not great to have people driving around with their head down. At this point, there's actually a little bit of confusion. The Senate changed a rule and passed a bill over to the House with some, what some people are saying, a little bit of lack of clarity on the process. So the issue's alive in the legislative session, and I think a lot of it boils down to, should police officers be able to stop people for this? Should it be what they call a secondary offense, where if you stop someone for speeding and then they're also texting, you can give them a ticket, but only in that kind of a scenario? And then there are a lot of people who say, look, if someone's distracted at the wheel, who cares if it's because they're texting or lighting a cigarette or doing anything else? Just go after the problem of distracted driving. So this debate, it's moved maybe a little bit further than it has in the past. Still, as I say, it's still alive, but hard to tell where it'll go.
This, I think, was the first week that measures that came over from houses of origination could be heard in the opposing chambers. Is that right, past week?
That's right. The cutoff was the week before,
Right.
And so we've seen a lot of Senate committees hearing House bills that pass the House committees hearing Senate bills. And once that happens and it's voted out of a committee, the next stop is a vote on the floor, and then the next stop is the governor, and it can become law.
So, of course, you mentioned House Bill 1749. We've talked about on the show quite a bit before. That's going to be a topic of discussion for the guests that we have coming up, among some other pieces of legislation. I want to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but what other issues? You mentioned the budget. We should probably talk about that here. The Oklahoman had a front page story, on Thursday of last week, that talked about how agencies are saying, look, this $611 million shortfall, if that hits our agency, we're going to lay off teachers, we're not going to be able to service the poor. I mean, we hear this every year usually. What's being discussed?
Well, that's right. I mean, you always hear, and I think it's important for taxpayers to remember, even when revenues are going up, you sometimes hear there's not enough money. And the reality right now is government may be spending more money in the future. This is a revenue shortfall from what they wish they were going to take in. It's not necessarily a shortfall in the way a lot of people would think of that. And the question the Oklahoman raised implicitly, a little more than explicitly, was, is this an across-the-board cuts thing, right? If you have a 10% shortfall in your family budget, you could just say, let's look at everything we spend money on, cut everything by 10%. The reality is, nobody would do that. Nobody could do that in their family budget. And yet sometimes government will do that or sort of threaten to do that because it hits some important areas. The budget process is going to have to look at, and you're getting glimmers of this right now, is going to have to look at, where can you actually make some deeper cuts so that you're not cutting or even spending more on things that are important. Education, corrections reform is a huge topic this year, as I think it should be, and those are kind of primary functions of government, right?
We've talked about those two topics on the show and had some guests on before. One of the topics we haven't touched on too much that seems to be getting a lot of traction is discussion about rural opportunity zones. And a little bit of that conversation came out this week. Can you explain to our viewers what this topic is all about?
Well, that's right. And this is one of these rare sort of tax cut bills that's still alive in the legislative session because of the shortfall. A lot of this has been sort of pushed off the table. But rural opportunity zones is an idea that says, look, there are counties in Oklahoma that are losing population, which is very tough on the economy. It's tough on the community. And let's say that if someone moves in from out of state into a county like that, they won't have to pay state income tax for a period of time. Kansas has done this, and the reports from Kansas, it's been helpful there in rural communities. So rural opportunity zones, this is an idea that is moving through the legislature here in Oklahoma, and potentially a way to help people with the state income tax burden.
Yeah, so not only incentivizing growth in rural communities across Oklahoma like our competing states are, another tax issue that was proposed actually came out of an editorial in the Oklahoman this past week, had to do with eliminating the income tax on teachers. And this is, of course, with the education discussion this year. Where does that stand? What kind of traction do you think that'll get?
Well, it's a bill in the legislative session. The comments on social media on this one were all across the board. Fascinating to see. Huge debate in the comments section on the Oklahoman, because people look at this. Some people looked at this and said, well, why would you give a special tax break to teachers? I think a lot of people don't realize we do that for aerospace engineers in Oklahoma already. And a lot of folks said, look, we're talking about giving teachers a raise. Why not just let them keep some of that money in their own pocket, right? Isn't that the easiest thing to do? And moves us further down the road toward phasing out the state income tax altogether. So yeah, I think this is a live round in the legislative session. I think this is going to be part of the budget debate, part of the education debate, and very, very clever idea from two lawmakers in the Oklahoma legislature.
Well, and we'd love to hear what you think about that. Go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/MiddleGround TV and let us know about any of these topics we're discussing, but especially the income tax, no income tax for teachers. We're going to take a quick break, folks, but when we return, we're going to discuss how taxpayer dollars are assisting local unions, plus both sides at the Capitol regarding this issue when we return.